The Bite Club podcast is proudly brought to you by Beth Curran and Akshaya Parthasarathi.
The Bite Club podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Welcome to Bite Club, a tech podcast crafted by the girls for the girls, where we aim to elevate, educate, and explore the exciting world of technology.
So tune in and remember, the first rule of Bite Club is to talk about Bite Club. I forget how we start these. You're doing the rule, aren't you?
I'm doing the rule.
Cool.
You can start us off, or I can.
I'll just kick off.
Yeah.
And do
Okay.
cool. All right. Cool. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 2 of Bite Club.
Wow, that feels surreal.
Yeah, season 2. It's
Season
like
2.
It's getting serious.
Yeah.
Real.
It's getting serious between us. Yeah.
We've taken the next step in our relationship.
We have. This
by
is
making
a
a second
significant
season.
milestone for us.
Yep.
This is cake worthy.
Yeah. Oh, we should have done that.
How have
It
you
would make
been?
more sense if we recorded in the same place.
Sorry?
If we could share a cake. It would make more sense to share a cake if we didn't record on Zoom.
Yeah.
To both be eating cake in our houses.
Yeah. I just needed any other excuse to eat cake.
Sorry, I'm good. How are you? How has
I've
the
been
break
good as
treated
well.
you?
It's been weird, Beth, not having to see you every other week or so. But it's not been so bad because I still feel like we do have our catch-ups via Zoom this way. It's quite nice. For those who don't remember, sorry, Beth has moved away.
Yeah, it's a sad time. We don't work together anymore.
Yeah, to different grass now. But it's pretty. It's been a welcome change. And we still catch up, so it's nice. It's nice that we still have this podcast going on. So that's how you know that it's really serious, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't die when I moved companies.
Yeah.
All right, so let's crack on. So for season 2, episode 1, our launching episode, I'm very excited about the person I'm going to talk about. She's pretty iconic. But firstly, I wanted to see what rule you have for us today.
Okay.
Shia.
Lot of pressure for this one, right? Because I was trying to think about what do we open up
never.
with?
There's never too much pressure on the rules. The rules
I know,
are
but
just
it
for
was
fun.
like the first episode after we come back, so I didn't want to flake it. But I went with a really simple one, which is so our rule for this Bite Club episode is that never hold back a compliment. So that basically goes to say that if you think that you have to walk up to a stranger in public and tell them that you really like their shoes or umbrella or just anything about them, make sure to go ahead and do it. And this is science-backed, right? So there was this phase that I had back in undergrad where I actually did this for a solid week. I used to walk up to random strangers and just tell them a compliment that whatever that I liked about them. I had that going on. It was like a whole thing. And it was because science, there's some article that I read where it went to say that not only does receiving random compliment brighten up brighten up the stranger's day or even just your friend's day, but it also alters some kind of brain chemistry within you where you become just addicted to that little bit of dopamine hit that you get from seeing the other person. And I also think we should just take that time out in our busy lives nowadays to just go ahead and share that compliment, because we're constantly thinking about whether is it too weird to be this approachable or whether this will sound too forthcoming. And I think it has a lot to do with how much we've kind of stuck to our cocoons ever since the pandemic and stuff. So this is a good way. So this is definitely a good way to get started. So if you see whoever it may be, woman, man, and if you can think of a genuine compliment, and by genuine, I mean you genuinely see something that you would like to credit them for, go ahead and do it, because that could be either the start of a really wonderful networking or just a friendship for you, or it could just be that you made somebody's day just a tad bit better. So yeah.
That's so nice. I love that. I think that's so true. And it's so like that feeling of it makes you feel better as well. Like I used to, whenever I was having a crappy day, if I would like go through a drive-through, I'd like pay for the person behind me.
Yeah.
Because just like doing that like nice little thing, it
Yeah, yeah,
actually like makes
yeah.
you feel better and it makes
Yeah.
you feel like you're contributing something to society.
Yeah. A little bit.
Having a
Yeah,
sad
for
day.
sure. Yeah.
Although that one's always a gamble because you never know if there's going to be like a family of 10 in a van behind
And
you
they've
that's
just
ordered
ordered.
like
Yeah, I know.
$300 worth of McDonald's. And you're like, oh, never mind. Sorry.
For sure. Which is why I said genuine compliment, because you can't just like
Yeah.
say something that's very like the first thing that you notice. So I would
Yeah.
say if it's, yeah, I'd say to dig deeper than physical appearances or attributes that you can see directly,
Mm.
and really just go into something else that you think would be a significant compliment. So yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Hmm.
All right. Well, shall we crack on with the report?
Yes, I'm ready to learn.
Beautiful. So, for our very first episode of season two, I'm going to be talking about Ada Lovelace, who
Oh,
is
good
an
old
absolute
Ada.
icon of women in tech.
Yes.
And she's someone I've kind of been keeping in the back pocket for like a special occasion.
Okay.
But I felt like launching our second season, sorry, is a worthy enough
A
occasion.
very worthy
Um,
occasion. Yeah.
Ada Lovelace, if you don't know, she's often referred to as the first computer programmer.
Yep.
And she was a woman who was wildly ahead of her time.
Mm-hmm.
She's probably the oldest, as in furthest back in history person that we've talked about, or will talk about, because
Mm-hmm.
she was involved in like the very first versions of the computer.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
so Ada Lovelace was born as Ada Byron in 1815.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
that's
much
definitely
earlier
the
than anyone
oldest. Yeah.
else we've looked at.
Yep, for sure.
So you can imagine in England, very kind of like high society English. Think sort of Bridgerton vibes. I don't think it's
Yes.
like quite the same period, but
Yes. So
in
far
that
back
kind
that
of
I can only see drawings of her and not like actual
yes, exactly.
photos.
There's no photos of her, only
Yeah.
paintings. So yes, imagine that. She was born to the poet Lord Byron. So
Mm-hmm.
he's quite a famous English poet.
Yep.
It was her father, and he was an interesting man. Like I said, very famous and successful English poet, but he was also known for being a bit of a scoundrel, had
Okay.
lots of affairs, lots of gambling, lots of
Spicy.
just like a wild life. Someone described him, let me find it so I've got it right.
Wait,
He
does
was
this make
described,
Ada a nepo baby? Sorry.
yes, I will get there, but
Okay,
yes.
cool.
Yes, he was a very successful man.
Okay.
And so she was born very much into high society and
Ah,
into wealth and privilege.
okay.
But yes, so he was known as mad, bad, and dangerous to know
Mm.
by many people. And that becomes clear when you learn that he left Ada and his wife, Ada's mother,
Mm-hmm.
um, when Ada was only 5 weeks old.
Oh,
So they'd been married. Ada's parents had been married for less than a year.
okay.
Ada's mother, her name was Lady Anne, or
Okay.
Annabelle.
Okay.
And yeah, so they had a baby, and he was like, you know what? I'm out of here. See ya.
Scandalous.
So not a great father figure, and yes, a bit scandalous. But he was again kind of already known as this sort of reckless, wild man.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but her mother, thankfully, was also very well off. She was from a very kind of high society family,
Okay.
not royal, but kind of an heiress. Like owned, their family owned a lot of land and that kind of high society culture, in England at the time. And so they were able to kind of stay afloat, and her mother and her family was able to provide for them, even though you know her father had gone off somewhere else in the world to
Yep.
continue writing poetry and sleeping with anyone he found, basically. So,
Okay.
yeah, men, women, whoever. Like he was
Okay, cool. Yeah.
a wild man. So, in reaction to this, her mother, Lady Anne, she was actually quite a well-educated woman for someone in that time in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
She had some mathematical education and some scientific education, and she thought thought of Lord Byron's tendency for recklessness as sort of related to his artistic leanings and the fact that he was a poet and he was an artist and all that kind of stuff. And so she was
Right.
really determined that Ada would not inherit these attributes. She was
Okay.
like, and so basically she was like, I don't want you getting into poetry. I don't want you getting into literature. It's all just a slippery slope into a
Oh, poor thing.
debaucherous lifestyle.
I mean, it's not
Um,
the poetry's fault.
yeah, I know, and I think yeah, it's an interesting take, but I think yeah, Lady Byron saw it as sort of those artistic pursuits were encouraging the frivolity, whereas if Ada got a
Mm.
mathematic and scientific education, then she would be less likely to, um, yeah,
Fool
have that
around.
reckless tendency. Yeah,
Yeah, I get it.
which is very interesting and is not, I think, an unheard of conception even now with parents. Like often parents are like,
Absolutely not.
you want
Yeah.
to get a more scientific education and not an
Yeah.
artistic one.
Artistic one. Yeah.
Um, but this was, a little bit more unusual at the time,
Yeah.
especially for women,
Yeah.
because science and maths was a fairly closed field and it was a fairly male field.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, yeah, really her mother's push that pushed her to get that education. So Ada took to it really well. I think she inherited some of her mother's interest in mathematics and some of her skill. She became a very competent mathematician early in her life. And one of the things that I found interesting was, as you said before, she's a bit of a Nepo baby, right? Like she has, Lord Byron was her father, her mother's very affluent and, yeah, well off and able to get her in classes and get tutors and everything who come and teach her maths. Some of the greatest mathematicians at the time were her maths tutors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all amazing, but it just makes me think of how many young women at the time, but also even now, have the capacity for that skill and that knowledge and that learning, like how much they would be able to do. But it's a matter of privilege, right? They don't have the resources. They might not have had the resources that their parents could hire maths tutors for them and science tutors and
Yeah,
all that
for
kind of
sure.
thing.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting that it's like she's this, really trailblazing woman, but there might be have been so many women at that time who could have
Who could have done
um,
that? Yeah, that's a
pursued this
yeah.
field.
Yeah.
Maybe not made the same discoveries that Ada did, but could have pursued it if it was a more socially encouraged thing. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
just my little take on it.
That's a good, no, that's a very valid point.
She
It's
was
just,
very lucky to
yeah,
have the
it's about
privilege.
availability of resources for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, privilege. Yeah.
absolutely. So Ada, yeah, she became very interested in maths and science. And when she did her debutante ball, so again, very Bridgerton, when she like
Mm-hmm.
came out into
Mm-hmm.
society,
Mm-hmm.
um, she met a man named Charles Babbage, who is widely known as the creator of the computer,
Computers. Yeah, the father of computers. Yeah.
the father of computing.
Learned
Yeah.
about this man.
So she was, let me get it right, she was 17 when she met him, and he was mid 30s, maybe
Mm-hmm.
40s. But he saw her as a mathematical and scientific equal.
Okay.
She showed a lot of interest in Charles Babbage's machines. So he had built the difference engine, which was kind of like a very early calculator that did arithmetic using machinery.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was also working on the plans for the analytical engine, which would go on to be known as the first computer. And I'll get a bit more into that later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so she got to know him and kind of worked with him on his computing and some of his pursuits and the maths that he was doing. She also got married to another man and they had 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
But once she'd finished having children, she was like, no, I want to go back to this computer thing. She was just like fascinated by it.
Okay.
Um, but Charles Babbage was a little bit of an insecure man.
Mm.
And he didn't want to publish anything about his work. He didn't want to reach out for funding really because he didn't want criticism, basically.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And
one way
so
to
it was all a
avoid.
little bit like under the radar. Yeah, it's one way to avoid it, is
Okay.
just to never talk about it. But eventually he was invited to a symposium happening in Italy.
Okay.
And I think he must have felt confident when he accepted the invitation. He was invited there to talk about his analytical engine, this
Okay.
theoretical early computer that he was building.
Mm-hmm.
And while he was there, a man whose name I don't have on hand, Luigi Menabrea, who
Mm-hmm.
was an Italian military engineer who went on to later become the Italian prime minister, random fun fact, he was at the conference and he basically wrote down everything that Charles Babbage said, because Charles
Mm.
himself had never put this into a paper or into writing really for publication. But Luigi was like, this is fascinating, I need to record it.
Okay.
So he put all this down. He wrote it, even though they were in Italy, but he wrote it in French. And then later he kind of sent it back over to Charles Babbage and said, hey, I took these notes, I've put your paper together, here you go. I want to publish it and I want people to know about this.
Okay.
But it was in French. So Charles Babbage asked Ada, who was kind of his assistant at that point, to translate it. And so she did that. She translated this kind of compendium.
Research thesis. Yeah.
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 That was written by someone who listened to Babbage.
Right.
And she also corrected a lot of it. So a lot of it was he'd written down calculations incorrectly, or he'd made some incorrect conclusions from what Babbage was saying. And Ada knew the machine a lot better.
Yeah.
So she corrected a lot of it. And then she also added her own notes.
Okay.
And I say notes in inverted commas, quotations, because her notes ended up being 3 times longer than the original paper that she was transcribing. So really, it ended up being.
But actually.
Oh, by the way, here's all my thoughts.
Yeah.
So really, it ended up being more like her paper with a preface by this Italian.
Yeah, the Italian.
Man who had taken notes at Babbage's conference.
Yeah.
So that's her only paper. That's her only research that we have written down.
Okay.
But that is what that paper's gone on to be kind of her foundational work and the work that she's most known for, where she detailed her computer program that she developed. And she developed it for basically deriving a particular type of number called the Bernoulli numbers from an equation. So given previous numbers, can you derive this mathematical term? And she fully hand wrote this computer program. It had loops, it had conditional branching, had variable storage. It's amazing. It's really incredible to look at.
Fascinating. In what language?
Well, it's kind of just in mathematical language.
Okay.
And I'll explain how that works later. But the way that the analytical engine worked was based on punch cards.
Okay.
And again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But she kind of wrote it. It was translating the mathematical logic into something you could feed into a computer.
Okay.
Essentially.
Got it.
So she wrote the translation from mathematical logic to how would I tell this to a machine?
Right. Okay.
And that's why it's kind of considered the first computer program.
Right.
One other really important thing to note is that the analytical engine, this big computer machine that Babbage was developing, was actually never built. So it's a purely theoretical machine. He had all of the he had all of the plans, the schemas, the diagrams, all the details of it written out, but they were unable to secure the funding, largely because he didn't want to promote his ideas because he was afraid of criticism.
Got it.
They didn't have the funding to actually build it. And so all of this work that Ada Lovelace did, and he did as well, was purely theoretical, which is what makes it that much more amazing that later people found that it actually is a functional computer. People have done it and they've kind of modeled it. There still actually hasn't been one built, fun fact. So if anyone listening is feeling inclined to spend the rest of their life building a gigantic, version of the world's first theoretical computer, there you go, there's a project for you. It would be about the size of a small room.
Wow.
And would take you a long time, but maybe someone should do it. It was a purely theoretical piece of equipment, and this research wasn't actually really known to the public until Alan Turing actually was starting to develop his computer, which, if you've seen The Imitation Game, that's who that movie is about, and he built a code cracking computer to help decipher German codes being transmitted during World War II in the 1940s. So this is 100 years later, basically, Alan Turing is kind of doing all this research, and he digs up these papers, and he's like, "Whoa, this is really fascinating." And he starts analyzing it and reading it, and coming to the conclusion that actually it does work, and this actually is, solid theory that he then built on to help build his code-breaking machine.
Nice.
Yeah, Alan Turing is actually kind of responsible for getting Babbage and Lovelace's work back
Out there.
out
Okay.
into the public knowledge. So it was kind of just buried for 100 years, which is pretty crazy. So back to Ada's life. After she'd done some work with Charles Babbage and after she published this paper, she had a little bit of a tumultuous time later in life. So maybe she did pick up some of her father's tendencies, potentially some affairs, some significant money loss on gambling.
Okay.
And then she became quite ill. So unfortunately, she passed away at the age of only 36.
Oh, okay. Very young.
They believe it was cervical cancer.
Okay.
So some kind of uterine cancer, which just reminds you that these are things that we can prevent pretty easily now with detection. But back then it was, you'd have no idea until you were basically already gone.
Yeah.
Which is very sad. So yes, she passed away at the age of 36. And that was actually the exact same age that her father, Lord Byron, ended up living to. So Lord Byron also died at the age of 36. And even though she never really knew her father, like he left when she was 5 weeks old, she actually asked to be buried next to him. Because I think she had a bit of a lifelong fascination with his poetry.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's one of those things of, her mother tried to keep her away from it.
Yeah, I know. And you just get really curious.
Yeah, but it led to her being really fascinated by him, even though he was, for all intents and purposes, not really a dad to her.
Yeah.
And apparently that caused some controversy in the family. And she's still buried there. She's buried with Lord Byron in England.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the story of Ada Lovelace's life.
Tell me how nobody has made Ada Lovelace's life into a musical yet.
I was thinking that, or like a TV show. It would be such a good TV show.
It's got drama. It's got like a story of friendship. It's got
maybe we should write it. Maybe that can be our next creative pursuit. It'll be like from the creators of the Bite Club podcast.
And that one episode.
It's like a limited series, like one of those 6-episode Netflix series that's like
yeah. Can at least write it and then like pitch it, and then who knows? We get Anne
You're a
Hathaway
writer.
playing. Anne Hathaway playing Ada Lovelace.
Aim high. I love it. Assume that it'll be. We'll have people knocking down the door.
No, but it's a very fascinating story. Yeah. I mean, thank you for delving so much into it. But
it's a wild story.
It's very wild, and it just goes outside of like just a very traditional, okay, grow up, do this kind of a thing. But there's so many elements and so many famous names linked to this. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Apparently there is a movie with Tilda Swinton playing Ada Lovelace from 1997. I reckon we could do a show though. I reckon.
I mean, we need like a modern day version, right? Like if Mean Girls can get a reboot.
Oh, interesting. That
so
is
the
a
creative
cool
juices suddenly flowing.
We could call it. So Charles Babbage called her the Enchantress of Numbers. Which is very cool. So you could call it that. Anyway, sorry. We're
getting a bit carried away.
Sorry to our audience. We're getting a bit carried away about this show we're going to write. We'll let you know in 10 years if it ever comes to anything. I might get into a little bit about the actual analytical engine and the way that it worked, as well as the program that Ada wrote. I'm not going to get super in-depth with the program she wrote because it's pretty much like a complex mathematical process that she sort of translated into something you could feed into a computer. But I'll kind of talk about the way that she translated it into computer language. Yeah. Because don't want to overwhelm everyone with the technicalities of it because it's something that I also am a bit overwhelmed by in terms of the maths. But basically, the way that this analytical engine worked, and remember, I'm kind of talking about it like as if it worked on paper. It was never actually a real machine. But everyone who's looked at it since has verified that it would have worked had they put it together. So it basically worked it had a memory, so it had like a CPU.
Okay.
So it had an area where it actually did the computations, and then it also had memory to store numbers.
Okay.
And so what you would feed in was a punch card. And so a punch card is kind of just like a grid, and you put holes in the grid for the values that you want the computer to read. And then when you put the punch card in the computer, it puts little pins down. And if the pin is allowed to pass through the hole, then that is like an indicator of like a yes for that number. So say you put a punch in the 9 spot, then when you put the pins down in the computer, only the 9 pin will go through to the bottom, to the receiver at the bottom. And that is what tells the computer, okay, this is reading a 9.
9, yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense? Like, I kind of think of it like I am a bit of a craft fiend. I'm not particularly good at it, but I like doing craft.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I'm quite enjoying cross stitch.
Okay.
So I kind of imagine it like a cross stitch pattern where you have this pattern and it has each square on the grid is marked with the color that you need.
Yeah.
And so then as a person, you look at it and you go, okay, well, that square is green. And so you translate a green square of thread onto the corresponding spot onto the canvas.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea of a punch card. And they actually got this idea from the jacquard loom, which was an invention that had been around for a while. And it was used for weaving complex patterns onto fabric. So making like tapestries, lace, anything that had like a pattern on it. They would basically create these patterns on the punch cards. So they would draw this pattern pixel by pixel, which is where it's kind of like cross stitch, where you have each little square.
Yeah.
They would draw a pattern on a big series of punch cards, and then they would manually feed the punch cards in the right order. And so the thread, instead of it touching the pin at the bottom and, you know, indicating a computer process, it would actually thread a stitch where the holes were. And so this was an existing process that was used. And so Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace went and actually visited this loom because they'd heard about this like amazing technology. And yeah, they were just fascinated by it. They were like, that's so incredible. You can like weave these beautiful patterns. And all someone has to do is feed in these cards. And as long as you feed them in the right order, then you get a beautiful pattern out the other side. And so there's a quote where Ada Lovelace, she says, let me find it. We may say most aptly that the analytical engine weaves algebraical patterns just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves.
Okay.
So she's kind of saying like the computer is basically doing the same thing that the jacquard loom does. But instead of drawing patterns, it's drawing algebra.
Yeah.
And so on the punch cards that you would feed into this computer, you had a few things. So you needed to indicate the sequence of the punch cards. So which punch cards you do in which order.
First, yeah.
Yeah. And then you had a punch card for the operation.
Okay.
So that would tell the computer whether it was a multiplication, a minus, or a plus.
Makes sense, yeah.
And then you had a punch card for the variables. So it said you're retrieving the variables in the location like V1 and V4. And then it looks at what V1 and V4 are as they're stored in the memory. So you tell it which variables you're looking at. And then you tell it which variables you want it to assign the answer to. So it says pull these variables V1 and V4 and then put the answer in V5. And then you tell it the equation. So then you tell it the mathematical operation. So you say, I'm doing a multiplication and it's times 2. Or it's, you know, I'm doing an addition and it's plus 1. So each of these steps is an individual punch card because you need the information of what kind of operation are we doing, which numbers do you want me to use, and where do you want me to put the result? And then what's the actual operation happening? Yeah. So the way that you could then build up complex arithmetic is that you could basically have a series of punch cards that transformed your variables as you went along. But the first punch card says, take these 2 numbers and multiply them by 2.
Okay. Right?
And then it says, and then put the result here. The next punch card says, now get the result that you just put there, bring it back in and add 1 to it, and now put it here. Okay. And then the next punch card says, now get that result and subtract 10, like whatever it is. Yeah. And so what you end up with is something that you would describe algebraically as like 2x times 6 minus 1.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so you just
Yeah.
step through the mathematical equation one at a time,
Yeah.
retrieving the variable that you need each time that you feed in a new punch card. And that's the basis of it, right? And so what Ada did is she transcribed this really complex mathematical formula of retrieving the Bernoulli numbers, and she
Mm-hmm.
basically transcribed it into these punch cards. And not only that, but the Bernoulli numbers are, because it's a series, so it's something that you can get. You can get the 10th Bernoulli number or the 22nd Bernoulli number or the however many. She came
Mm-hmm.
up with a formula that included looping. So she
Mm-hmm.
figured out once you've got the first two,
Mm-hmm.
uh, depending on which one you want, you just have to redo this sequence of punch cards a certain number of times.
Okay.
So say you've already got your first two Bernoulli numbers and you need your 16th.
Okay.
Here's the chunk that calculates each one. So you just need to feed this same chunk back in
Yeah.
15 times or however many
Yeah.
times it is in
Yeah.
order to get out your 16th one.
16th one. Yeah.
So she built this pattern of how you can derive something by using the same logic, but just the amount of times you apply it. And
Yeah.
so this is a loop, right? Like
This is
this
a
is
good old for loop. Yeah.
it's a classic loop, right? And so
Yeah.
it's an if the result is this, then
Keep
run the
doing
loop
it again and
this
again.
many times. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Which is an amazing concept to like formulate in your brain when this machine
Yeah.
doesn't even exist.
Uh-huh.
And so that's where we kind of talk about her building the first computer program, because it's the first program that kind of includes this sort of looping pattern, this like branching logic of if then that.
Yeah.
So and Charles Babbage had built like simple algorithms and programs for his machine, because obviously
Mm-hmm.
he envisioned the machine and he needed proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to kind of dismiss that. But Ada's real leap was sort of taking it to that next level and making it standardized and being able to envision this, I guess, infinitely extendable process where you could get whatever Bernoulli number you need.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to do the loop enough times.
Yeah.
So that was what she did, which is just fascinating and is the kind of thing I kind of wish someone had like built this so we could just like watch it work, because it would be so
Okay.
fun to like
Yeah.
watch this thing that she wrote hundreds of years ago like actually give out a result.
Mm-hmm.
But the theory is all correct, and so there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't work.
It wouldn't have worked. Yeah, for sure.
So that was her kind of big breakthrough, is that she fabricated this program.
Mm.
And yeah, so that's the technology that she built, which is incredible. So one of Ada's other big breakthroughs, and this is a very common theme if you've listened to season 1 of the podcast, is that she saw the potential of these machines for things beyond numbers.
Okay.
So she saw it for, she suggested that you could use it for music.
Okay.
So one quote she said, suppose that the fundamental relations of pitched sounds in the science of harmony and of musical composition were susceptible to such expression and adaptations. The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent.
So basically, ChatGPT that writes your music notes right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So she's saying,
Yeah.
if we can just translate music into these processes, if we can
Yeah.
translate it into a punch card, into an input, into a program,
Yeah.
then this computer could do anything.
Yeah, that
And
makes sense because
this
you can
is-
provide it a chord and you can tell that
Yeah.
we need a verse, then you need a chorus, then you need another verse, and then just go ahead and
Yeah.
do that. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And so,
Yeah.
and this is such a common theme of like women in tech
Being
seeing the
pioneers.
possibilities
Yeah.
of something beyond the nuts and bolts of what it's made to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And she kind of saw, we don't have to use numbers for this. We could use anything. And so that was one of her big breakthroughs, and one of the things that, again, hundreds of years later, people are like, oh, yeah, we can actually do that. That's
Yeah.
actually really impactful and interesting. And so she just saw kind of limitless possibilities for this.
Mm.
And that's why she threw so much of herself into it, because she understood the potential of it. And she wrote a lot of this in her paper. So I'd highly recommend reading it.
Okay.
She wrote a lot of these things down about what she believed the computer's potential to be, which lines up with what modern computers are now.
Mm.
So yeah, she's kind of the founder of thinking about things in a procedural, programmatic
Programmatic
way.
way. Yeah, for sure.
And really just laid the foundations for that so far ahead of her time.
Wow, yeah. Do we know how exactly does this arithmetic or the programmatic way with which Ada has described things exactly aided Alan Turing with his code breaking?
Oh, good question. I am not sure, but Alan Turing's work was kind of the basis of artificial intelligence,
Right, yeah.
in terms of a computer operating on its own. And I
Yeah.
think her concept of looping through and allowing it to run
Like finding a
on its
pattern,
own.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
kind of was part of it, but it'd be interesting to look into how that was specifically influenced. I didn't want to get down that rabbit hole because I felt like I could probably talk about Turing's work for a whole nother podcast.
For sure. Yeah.
But yeah, he was certainly inspired by it, if nothing else.
Hmm. Interesting. That
So
was
yeah,
really
that's all I
interesting.
have for this report.
Thanks, Beth. That was a very scandalous one to begin with, and then really
Yeah.
enlightening towards the end of
Yes.
it.
Yeah, I had no idea that her father was Lord Byron until I
Me
started researching
neither.
this.
I
I was
know.
like, what?
So I ended up on this Wikipedia page, which is literally a page that's dedicated to Charles Babbage's Saturday night soirees. So it's a page that he used to have gatherings in
Oh,
his home in
interesting.
London. And these were just soirees that were attended by the cultural elite. And the way that I'm looking at the guest list right now, it makes me feel like it's kind of like one of those, on Disney Channel back in the old days where they used to have crossover episodes
Oh
of like
yeah.
Hannah Montana. So so there's
Yes.
like so at the same time that Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage lived was the same timeline in which Charles Darwin, Charles Dickens,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
Emma Darwin and all these people existed at the same time. And they were like friends or, just
Yeah.
people
That
who
like
met up to like,
British high society
yeah, pretty
scientific
much. And
circle. Yeah.
yeah, but I don't know, it's like a modern day gathering of, I don't know, like Zuckerberg and Musk or something.
Yeah. It feels like the inauguration.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Uh,
They're all sitting in
yeah.
the front row.
We don't want to talk about
Okay,
that.
let's
Yeah.
not get into that. I'll be too sad.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean
Um,
that's pretty cool. Like how some of the greats really did hang out at the same time. One was discovering
yeah.
evolution, the other one was figuring out programs.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Really cool
Yeah,
stuff.
absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. That was a very interesting episode. I hope everybody gets to go down Ada's timeline and probably get to know more about her. And if they want to join us in writing out her life as a modern
Yes.
day TV
Any
show
ideas?
produced for Netflix kind of a thing, please reach
If anyone
out
has
to
any
us.
contacts at Netflix, we don't actually have
Yes.
a script yet, but
Oh
if
my
you
God,
want to just
yes,
get us on
actually
the
that.
hook.
Yeah. But we need to mark IP on this. I hope we didn't give it away right now.
Oh yeah, no one. We have to write it fast because
Please
then
don't
someone else
steal
will do
it.
it.
Oh,
All about
thanks.
hundreds of thousands of listeners.
Yes.
Someone will steal it.
It's fine. Oh my God. Anyways, thank you, Beth. That was a really good episode. And a great start to season 2 as well. Thanks so much.
No worries. So nice to chat to you again.
Yes. Catch everyone next for the next episode, which I'll be covering.
Amazing. Can't wait.
Yeah. See you all. Bye.
Bye.